Most people think retiring early is about having enough money. Work a bit longer, save a bit more, top up the pension pot. Get to that number, whatever number feels safe in your head, and then finally you can stop. It sounds sensible. In fact, it sounds responsible. But here is a calculation most financial advisors won't sit down and do with you. If you grind through one more year of work, one more year of early alarms, difficult colleagues, and Sunday evenings you can't quite enjoy, the average person in their late 50s adds roughly £10,000 to their pension savings. Maybe a bit more, maybe less, but let's call it £10,000. Now, the average nursing care home in the UK today costs around £1,500 a week. That is not the premium option. That is the middle-of-the-road, adequate care, unremarkable option. Your extra £10,000 covers 6 weeks. 6 weeks of care home fees in exchange for 52 weeks of your life. The last 52 weeks, quite possibly, when your knees still work properly and your mind still wants to go somewhere. That is the trade most people are making without realizing it. You are not building a retirement. You are prepaying for a care home bed. Now, I am not saying this to be bleak. I am saying it because this is the calculation that actually matters, and almost no one is running it. There is also a structural reason this happens, a shape to how retirement costs actually move over time. And once you understand it, the whole just one more year logic collapses. But more on that in a moment. What I want you to know first is this: you do not need £1 million to retire. You do not need to wait until 67 for the state pension to kick in. There is a way to build what I call a 12-year tax-free bridge, using your personal allowance combined with ISA drawdowns, that can give you £25,000 a year in your pocket, with nothing going to HMRC from 55 all the way to 67. If that sounds like something worth understanding, stick around. And if you are not already subscribed, do that now. This is the kind of thing I cover every week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Let's get into it. Let me introduce you to David. David is 58. He's a mechanical engineer, been doing it for 30 years. His mortgage is gone, his kids are sorted. He has £350,000 sitting in his pension, and by most reasonable measures, he is in better shape than the vast majority of people his age in this country. And yet, every weekday morning at 6:30, David is on the platform at his local station, waiting for the same train, heading to the same office, to work for a manager who is 15 years younger than him and not especially good at the job. Why? Because David has a number in his head. £500,000. He does not know exactly where that number came from. He has heard it mentioned. It feels round and solid and safe. And he is not there yet, so he keeps going. This is not a character flaw. This is an extremely common pattern, and there is a specific mechanism that creates it. Financial planners have long used something called the smile curve to explain how retirement spending actually works. The idea is straightforward. You spend freely in the early years of retirement, when you are active and healthy. That spending tapers off in the middle years as life gets quieter. Then it edges up slightly at the end as health costs creep in. Drawn on a graph, it curves like a smile. It is a reassuring model. It is also, for many people in the UK, quietly wrong, because the smile curve does not account for what the social care system in this country actually does to your finances. Here is the mechanism most people do not understand until it is too late. If you ever need residential or nursing care in England, and around 1 in 4 people over 65 will need it for more than a year, according to NHS data, the state will only step in to help pay once your assets fall below £23,250. That threshold includes savings, investments, and in many cases, the value of your home. If you have more than that, you pay for everything yourself, every week, at current rates. That gentle upward curve at the end of the smile does not stay gentle. For people with assets, it becomes a near vertical line. That is the J-curve. And it is what happens when the smile curve meets the reality of means-tested social care. So what does this mean for David, and for anyone in a similar position? It means that the extra money you are working so hard to accumulate right now is not being saved for a better life. It is being queued up for a system that will draw it down, systematically, at £1,500 a week, until you fall below the threshold and the council finally steps in. The more you save beyond a certain point, the longer you simply fund your own care home at full price. You do not get a better room. You do not get better treatment. You get the same service, you just pay for it longer. That is the invisible cost of one more year. I have been close enough to this situation, watching it play out with people I know, to find it genuinely difficult to watch. Particularly when the person involved spent their final working years skipping holidays, working weekends, telling themselves it was all going to be worth it. It was not worth it. The money did not buy them a better ending. It just extended the waiting room. Now, none of this means you should spend recklessly or ignore your finances. What it means is that the framing of more savings equals more safety breaks down at a certain point, and most people are pushing well past that point without realizing the structure has changed underneath them. Your healthy years are not an abstraction. They have a number attached to them, and that number is smaller than most people expect. Here is a number the pension industry does not put in its brochures. The average healthy life expectancy in the UK, not how long you will live, but how long you will live in good health, free from significant illness or disability, is around 63 years old. For women it sits slightly higher. For men in parts of the north it can be lower. But the national average hovers right around that mark, according to the Office for National Statistics. 63. If you are 58 and still at your desk, you may have 5 years of full health left, possibly a few more if you are fortunate. But the ONS data is not being dramatic, it is simply describing what happens to most bodies after a certain point. The conditions do not arrive all at once, they accumulate. A knee that was manageable at 60 becomes a real limitation at 64. Energy levels that felt temporary at 62 turn out not to be temporary at all. This is not pessimism. It is just the arithmetic of aging, and it matters enormously for how you think about the timing of retirement. Most retirement planning is built around the question, will I have enough money to last until I am 85 or 90? That is a reasonable question. But it is not the only question, and for many people it is not even the most important one. The more uncomfortable question is this: how many years of genuinely good health do I actually have left to spend this money in? I will be honest with you. There was a period in my career when I would have given you a very different answer to that. I used to advise people to build the largest possible financial buffer they could, hedging against every scenario out to 90, 95, even beyond. Cover every base. Leave nothing to chance. I was wrong. I was optimizing for survival on a spreadsheet rather than for an actual life. And the risk I kept underweighting, the one I barely mentioned, was not running out of money at 85. It was dying at 65 with a full pension pot and a list of things you never got around to doing. That risk is real. It happens. I have seen it happen. There is also a psychological layer to this that is worth naming directly, because it catches a lot of people who are otherwise quite clear-headed about money. Some people delay retirement not because of the finances, but because of identity. Work gives structure. It gives status. It answers the question people ask at dinner parties. Stepping away from it can feel like stepping off a ledge, even when the finances are genuinely fine. Others delay because of what I would call number paralysis. They imagine living to 100, they factor in inflation at frightening rates, they run worst-case scenario after worst-case scenario, and they end up frozen. The fear of running out eventually outweighs the reality of what they already have. Both of these are understandable. Neither of them is a financial problem. They are emotional responses to an uncertain future, and they are extremely common among people in their late 50s who are otherwise perfectly capable of making this decision. But here is what the data keeps saying, quietly and without sentiment. If you wait until 67 to retire, the current state pension age, you are statistically gambling with the last 4 years of your full health. If that gamble pays off and you stay well, fine. But if it does not, the retirement you spent decades planning for becomes something quite different from what you imagined. That window between 63 and 67 is not guaranteed. For a lot of people, it is the window. So if you have decided that enough is enough, that you are ready to stop, or at least to seriously consider it, the practical question becomes, how do you actually bridge the gap? Because between 55 and 67, there is a 12-year stretch with no state pension, and getting that wrong is where most early retirement plans quietly fall apart. Let me introduce you to Sarah. Sarah is 56. She has spent the last 28 years working in NHS administration. She is good at her job. She is also exhausted by it, the restructures, the targets, the sense that the system she joined to help people has slowly buried that purpose under layers of process. Her pension pot sits at around £280,000. She owns her home outright. She has no debt. By any sensible measure, Sarah could stop, but she has not handed in her notice. When you ask her why, she gives you a very specific answer. If I take £30,000 a year from my SIPP to live on, HMRC will take a chunk of that in income tax, and once I start drawing it down at that rate, the pot will be gone before I even reach 67. That fear is not irrational. It is based on a real gap in the system, a 12-year stretch between the age you can access your private pension and the age the state pension finally arrives. Here is how that gap works, mechanically. The current normal minimum pension age, the earliest point at which you can legally access a private pension, is 55. That rises to 57 in April 2028, so if you are planning around this, it is worth knowing where you stand. The state pension, meanwhile, does not begin until 67 under the current timetable. That is potentially 12 years with no state income whatsoever, no automatic floor, just whatever you have built yourself. And the instinctive response, draw down from your SIPP or workplace pension to cover living costs, is exactly where people get into trouble. Here is the problem. Your pension withdrawals, beyond the tax-free lump sum, count as taxable income. Every pound you pull out sits on top of your personal allowance and gets taxed accordingly. Draw £30,000 a year, and £17,430 of that is sitting in the basic rate band, being taxed at 20%. That is roughly £3,500 walking out of your pot every year in income tax alone. Money you did not need to lose. Do that for 12 years and the damage compounds. You are not just losing £3,500 once. You are losing the growth that £3,500 would have generated if it had stayed invested. The real cost is considerably higher than it looks on the surface, and that assumes you stay in the basic rate band. If your pension pot is larger and you draw more heavily, perhaps because you had a good salary and saved diligently, you could tip into the 40% band without realizing it. Suddenly the responsible thing you did for 30 years is being taxed at the same rate as someone earning 6 figures. People who do not plan for this gap tend to fall into one of two patterns. They either draw down too aggressively, erode the pot faster than intended, and end up anxious in their early 60s, or they draw down too cautiously, live smaller than they need to, and arrive at 67 having given up years of decent living to protect a pot that turned out to be fine all along. Neither is a good outcome. Sarah knows all of this. She has read enough to understand that there is a wrong way to do this. What she does not yet know is that there is a right way. A structure that lets her take £25,000 a year out of her savings, maintain a comfortable life, and hand HMRC absolutely nothing for the entire 12-year stretch. It is not a loophole, it is not a scheme, it uses two completely standard UK account types, combined in a specific order, in a way that most people in their 50s have simply never been shown. That is what we are going to look at next. So let's look at what Sarah actually does. She has £280,000 in her SIPP and a stocks and shares ISA she has been quietly building for the past several years. She wants £25,000 a year to live on, not extravagantly, a decent holiday, the car serviced without wincing, the heating on when she wants it. A normal life lived without the Sunday dread. Here is the structure. Every UK taxpayer has a personal allowance, the amount of income you can receive each year before paying a penny of income tax. for the 2026 to 2027 tax year that sits at £12,570. It has been frozen there for a while now, and there is no sign of it moving. Most people think of this allowance as something that gets eaten up automatically by their salary or their pension. What they do not realize is that if you are no longer working, that £12,570 is sitting there unused, and you can point it directly at your SIPP withdrawals. So Sarah withdraws exactly £12,570 from her SIPP each year. That amount lands precisely on her personal allowance. HMRC's share of it, zero. That covers just over half of what she needs. The remaining £12,430 comes from her stocks and shares ISA. And here is the part that makes the whole structure work cleanly. In the UK, money withdrawn from an ISA is completely tax-free. Not partially tax-free, not tax-deferred, entirely free, whether it is the original capital or decades of growth sitting on top of it. It does not count as income for tax purposes. It does not interact with her personal allowance. HMRC cannot see it, because by design there is nothing for them to see. £12,570 from the SIPP, £12,430 from the ISA, total £25,000 in her pocket. Income tax paid, nothing. That is the bridge, and it is worth noting what this strategy has not even touched. The 25% tax-free lump sum that Sarah is entitled to take from her pension, that is still sitting there untouched. She can keep it as a reserve, invest it further, or use it to top up the ISA over time. It is an additional layer of flexibility that people often spend down too early, when in fact it works harder if you leave it alone for a while. Now, I want to be straightforward with you here. I am not your personal accountant, and the UK tax system has enough moving parts that individual circumstances genuinely matter. What works cleanly for Sarah depends on her having built up both pots in roughly the right proportions over time. If your situation is weighted heavily toward one account type and not the other, the numbers will look different. But the underlying logic is sound. It is entirely legal. And the remarkable thing, the thing that still surprises me when I think about it, is how few people in their 50s have ever had this explained to them in plain terms. The accounts exist. The allowances exist. The combination has always been available. It just requires someone to point out that you can use them together. Most people drawing down a pension in their late 50s are simply not doing this. They are pulling from a single source, paying tax they did not need to pay, and wondering why the pot is shrinking faster than the projections suggested. The bridge is not complicated. What it requires is sequencing, knowing which pot to draw from first, in what amount and why. Do that correctly, and 12 years of living costs become 12 years of zero income tax. Sarah gets her freedom. HMRC gets nothing. And the pot she spent 28 years building does what it was always supposed to do: support her life, not subsidize the tax system. If this has been useful, share it with someone you know who is in their 50s and still at their desk wondering if they can afford to stop. Chances are they can. They just have not seen the numbers laid out this way. So you have seen the structure. You understand why waiting is not automatically the safer choice, and you can see how the bridge works in principle. The question now is where to actually start. Not in 6 months, not after the next appraisal cycle. The following 3 things can be done in the next week, from your kitchen table, without speaking to anyone. The first is to check your state pension record. Log into the HMRC app or the government gateway online. Search Check Your State Pension Forecast, and it will take you straight there. What you are looking for is your number of qualifying years. You need 35 years of national insurance contributions to receive the full new state pension, which currently sits at £11,502 a year. I still remember the first time I checked my own record on that portal. It felt oddly nerve-wracking, like waiting for exam results you had forgotten you were sitting. But the moment you see that number of qualifying years confirmed on screen, something shifts. A question you have been carrying around for years turns into a fact you can actually plan from. If you are short of 35 years and you are planning to leave work at 55, This matters. You can fill gaps by making Class 3 voluntary contributions, currently around £824 per missing year. For most people, that is one of the best value financial decisions available anywhere in the UK system. A single year's top-up buys you roughly £329 of additional state pension every year for the rest of your life. The maths on that is difficult to argue with. The second action is to look honestly at where your savings are sitting right now. If everything is in your pension, your SIPP or your workplace scheme, and you have little or nothing in a stocks and shares ISA, the bridge I described in the last section is not yet available to you. You can build it, but you need time to do so. The annual ISA allowance is £20,000. If you are still working, even for another year or two, redirecting a meaningful portion of your monthly savings into a stocks and shares ISA rather than adding further to a pension pot that may already be sufficient. That is the move that builds the second leg of the bridge. You do not need to stop contributing to your pension entirely. You simply need both pots to exist in workable proportions. That balance is what gives you the tax-free sequencing later. The third action is to have an honest conversation with yourself about what enough actually looks like. Not the number in your head that arrived from nowhere. Not the round figure that feels safe because it is large. The actual annual income you need to live the life you want. Heating on, car maintained, 1 or 2 trips a year, the odd dinner out. For most people outside London, that number is somewhere between £20,000 and £30,000 a year. Often closer to the lower end than people expect once the mortgage is gone and the children have left. If your pension pot is at £250,000 or above and you have some ISA savings alongside it, you may already be closer to the bridge than you realize. Do not let the gap between where you are and some imagined finishing line talk you out of a decision that the numbers might already support. Everything is now in front of you. The choice is yours to make. Let's come back to where we started. 1 extra year of work, £10,000 added to the pot, 6 weeks of care home fees purchased in advance. That exchange only makes sense if you believe the goal of retirement planning is to accumulate as much as possible for as long as possible. But that was never the actual goal. The goal was always to buy back your time while you still have the health to use it. The J-curve is real. The social care system is structured the way it is structured, and no amount of extra saving changes the mechanics of means testing. What changes is how much of your own money you spend waiting for the threshold to kick in. The 12-year bridge is the answer to the practical problem. How to live between 55 and 67 without handing HMRC a slice of income you were never supposed to owe. It is not complicated. It requires 2 account types, used in the right order, in amounts that stay within the rules that already exist. What it requires most of all is the decision to take it seriously before the window closes. Healthy life expectancy in this country sits at around 63. That is not a scare statistic. It is a planning input, and it belongs in your thinking just as much as your pension balance does. You do not need a perfect pot. You need a workable one, structured correctly, started soon enough. If this video has helped you see a way out of a situation that felt more fixed than it actually is, that is exactly what this channel is here for. Arthur's UK Retirement Guide exists for one reason, not to help you die with the largest possible balance, but to help you stop while your life still has room in it. Subscribe if you want more of this, and I will see you in the next one.